Hello, and welcome to the inaugural podcast of the Sports Wilderness. I'm Wandering Moses, and thank you for listening. We hope to have you listen to a series of these following various topics around the world of sports. And tonight, our inaugural topic has to do with the standards of greatness in sports. Now, great. What makes someone great? What constitutes greatness? Well, problem with doing a topic like this is that there are different standards of greatness in different sports. What is great in baseball is not the same as what's great in football, and ditto for basketball. Although baseball and basketball, you can make more of the same arguments than you could over football, and I think that fairly or not, there is a different standard for what constitutes greatness in football. You take football, for example, and you ask someone to name great players, almost invariably you're going to get a lot of players from a lot of Super Bowl winning teams. And that's because victory is that standard of greatness. You can be an offensive player on a team that has scored on defense 12 touchdowns during the season, and that defense has won several games, but yet you are still considered a winner on that basis. And even in the case of something like the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame is, unfortunately, especially in football, a lot of coattails get ridden on just because of these kinds of victories. Greatest example I can think of right off the top of my head, Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman, good quarterback in his career, and fantastic at managing the game, at being able to keep everything under control. His teams won 3 Super Bowls. All right. But Aikman himself never threw 30 touchdown passes in a single season. Didn't get a whole lot of stats, but yet because he was the quarterback of 3 Super Bowl winning teams on which Emmitt Smith, the NFL's all-time leading rusher, played, Troy Aikman gets into the Hall of Fame. Ditto for someone like Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin, if he played for the Seahawks, doesn't get into the Hall of Fame. End of story. But because he played for the Dallas Cowboys, and because he was on 3 Super Bowl teams, the Hall of Fame voters were willing to overlook the crack pipes and so forth and put him in. And I think that's a sham, especially when someone like Art Monk, who retired holding or having held several receiving records in football, it's just disgraceful that it finally took, Art Monk finally got in this past year, but to have him get in after Michael Irvin is just utterly ridiculous. So, and what makes it even more shocking is Monk played for 3 Super Bowl winners and on a 4th Super Bowl team. Apparently that wasn't enough for whatever reason. I guess because he wasn't as flashy. He handed the ball to the ref after he scored a touchdown, and he didn't do flashy dances and point for a first down when he got one. And I say this as someone who hates the Redskins. I'm an Eagles fan. I despise the Redskins. But Art Monk deserved to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. End of story. Now I want to shift a little bit here at this point, and going on this idea of victory being the standard of greatness in football, we bring up what I like to call Marino versus Dilfer. If you were to ask someone who the greatest quarterback of all time was, you might hear people say, well, Johnny Unitas, or someone might say Bart Starr, or someone will say Sammy Baugh even, especially if they're older. And then, inevitably, you'll get this one, Joe Montana. Alright, why? Well, he won 4 Super Bowls. Well, that's fantastic. What about Terry Bradshaw? He won 4 Super Bowls. Is he the greatest quarterback of all time? No. Montana won 4 Super Bowls. Well, that's fantastic. Well, would you take other quarterbacks over Montana if you had to win one game? I certainly would. And someone like Dan Marino, who retired with all of the passing records in his career, never won a Super Bowl. Fran Tarkenton, same thing. Marino broke all of Tarkenton's records at one point, and then eventually Brett Favre broke all of Marino's records, but neither of them ever won a Super Bowl. And as a result, they are held up as the stat guys who could never, quote-unquote, win the big one. So I want to ask you then, are there better quarterbacks out there who may have won one but don't ever hold up to the numbers put up by guys like Marino, like Tarkenton? So are you trying to tell me that someone like Trent Dilfer, who happened to land in the right place in Baltimore and caught lightning in a bottle having to play with one of the greatest defenses of all time, are you saying that Trent Dilfer is better than Dan Marino? Is Kenny Stabler better than Fran Tarkenton? Stabler beat the Vikings in a Super Bowl, but that doesn't make him a better quarterback than a guy who lost several Super Bowls in the process. I just think that when you really break it down, there is an unfortunate double standard among these players. But unfortunately, we love winners here in America, and football being the so-called America's game now, we tend to look at them only through the prism of victories. I mean, Tom Brady, if the Patriots hadn't lost the Super Bowl against the Giants, you would have already heard Brady as the greatest quarterback of all time. And he's only played for 7 years. 7 years is not long enough to put anybody in any kind of all-time discussion. You have to play at least 10. That's the way it's done in baseball. In order to make it to the Hall of Fame, you have to have played at least 10 years and then be retired for the 5 years after. What I've seen here is kind of an artificial construction that has applied, or been applied, I should say, to other sports. I mean, one of the big debates languishing in baseball here is certain pitchers, are they Hall of Famers? Mike Mussina, Curt Schilling. And unfortunately, I think Curt Schilling is going to get in over Mussina. And why? Because he had a bloody sock. And that's the only reason why. Alright, yeah, he pitched a couple great postseasons, and he had a couple of very good seasons. But he simply just doesn't have the numbers to get into the Hall of Fame. He just doesn't have them. And Mussina is very close, but he never won in a World Series. And I think that is incredibly unfortunate for them. But, this is the way the winds are blowing now, especially when it comes to the sports media, who, for them, flashy jewelry is what will convince them of someone's greatness or not, no matter how crappy of a career. I mean, there's probably someone out there who will tell you that Trent Dilfer is better than Dan Marino, just on the basis of having a ring. And with that, we conclude our first episode of the Sports Wilderness. We hope to see you again. We'll be on YouTube under the Wandering Moses channel. Thanks for listening, and have a good one.